This episode touches on some sensitive themes related to violence, so please listen and watch with care.
It's almost like the day before Stephen was murdered, everybody, black, white, were getting on playing football. Literally the day after, there was a massive split. It's a space which we don't talk about. I think we just expect people to go through traumatic events and then crack on.
Hi, I'm Ciaran Thapar and this is Safe, a conversation about violence affecting children and young people with adults who are trying to stop it. Sometimes you might see police tape at the end of your road or hear about another tragedy on the news when a teenager has lost their life. But who steps in to stop it happening again? Across Britain, funding to youth services have been cut in half over the last decade, but youth workers are still on the front line of violence prevention. Nobody knows this better than Ben Lindsay, youth worker, author and CEO of Power the Fight. I'm about to sit down with Ben to talk about how his experiences led him to become a youth worker, why we need to make therapy more accessible to teenagers, and his efforts to make public services more culturally sensitive in diverse communities. Ben Lindsay, welcome to Safe. It's great to have you here. When you were a child, how did you keep safe?
So my grandma lived in Blackheath, a big house in Blackheath. My uncles were there, my aunt was there, and it was only around the corner from like my mum's house. No matter what happened, I could go there, I could get fed, get looked after. It's always lively. And she was just an amazing woman she was like my best friend actually. And that was just a place where there was safety, there was joy, there was laughter, there was love, there was support. So yeah, definitely my grandmother's house.
Okay. My understanding is that your family were like quite active in community life. So presumably she was like a big part of that.
Yeah. So my family, like my mum and dad's side, both came from Jamaica in the 50s. And classically what happens when Jamaicans or anyone from the Caribbean came here in the 50s, one person would come over and they would work, they'd have like a house, and then they'd make enough money to eventually buy that house. And then they'd bring other people in and they'd stay in that house, and then they would make enough money and they'd buy a house, and it would continue. And my grandma, my grandfather, my great uncle, they housed quite a lot of people in Southeast London who were coming over from the Caribbean. So that's probably one of the first parts of kind of community engagement, which was part of my family. But they were also massively involved in the church, like in Southeast London, both my mum and my grandmother. And my mum would always take me on kind of free Nelson Mandela kind of marches in the 80s. So I wouldn't say we were like politically active, but we were definitely aware of the issues impacting not just like the hyper-local community, but also like globally. And yeah, we stood up for what we believed was right and true.
Mm-hmm. When you like kind of growing up in your teens, what was it like to be in Southeast London as someone at home, having that safety and having that sense of community in your family, but obviously having to navigate like quite a complex social environment in Britain at that time?
Revealing my age. So in the 90s, early 90s, I would have been like my early teens. And on one hand, it was a lot of fun, kind of the time when there's a lot of kind of dancehall, early hip hop, Tribe Called Quest, Nas, that type of stuff was like coming out. And then you had jungle as well. So there was this amazing mix of music and creativity which was going on. And there was a lot of fun in my household, and that was the safety part. But then outside of the house, there's a lot of time of community angst. Like the National Front were around, the BNP were about. My school was interesting where it was in Southeast London. It was situated a mile away from Eltham, where Stephen Lawrence was murdered. But at the same time, we had triads, we had Ghetto Boys from Lewisham. We had this mad mix of kind of gang warfare going on all around us. And the common denominator was they all wanted to take out black boys, it felt like at the time. So you had that kind of mix. And I suppose for me and my friends at the time, our home was safe, but as soon as you walked outside, and any given day, you didn't know who you were going to deal with. was it going to be the National Front today, or was it going to be Triads we were going to try it, or was it going to be Ghetto Boys? It was a tricky one, but at the same time, there was a lot of fun, you know. PlayStation, no, it wasn't PlayStation actually, Super Nintendo those days, and Street Fighter 2 and all that type of stuff, and a lot of football. We were playing a lot of music, but it was definitely a tricky place and time to navigate.
You referenced Stephen Lawrence's murder, obviously. I saw every year, I mean, if not more than that, you write on social media about how that impacted you when you were younger. And I think you actually even said it was the most impactful event of your teenage years. I'm also wary that like stuff, like you'd experienced things around that time, and your friends had as well. Just talk me through kind of that event, because it's a huge event for presumably you and in the sort of interior life that you're having at that time, but also for Britain.
Yeah. So I think it's William Blake who talks about in his poetry the age of innocence and the age of experience and going from one to the other. And I think Stephen Lawrence murder, I was 14, 15 at the time when it happened, definitely was a moment of a shift where you're like, oh, okay, the world isn't all kind of happy. Not everybody wants the best for you. There is some like evil forces out there. And so Stephen was murdered in the April. In the January, I almost lost my life to a racist attack in Southeast London. So that would have been January 93. But in 1991, Roland Adams was killed in a racist murder in Thamesmead. In 1992, Rowett Dougal was killed in Eltham. So I say all that to say that like that period of time was just, it felt like there was attacks and murders happening on a regular basis in Southeast London. And I'm sure it wasn't just Southeast London, but that was just my kind of the community I grew up in. When Stephen was murdered, as I said before, he was murdered a mile away from my school. So there was a lot of gossip and a lot of chat at the time. There were people in my school who would have definitely have known the accused. And there were people in my school who knew Stephen as well. And I had friends who went to school with Stephen, who were really good friends with Stephen. So it was a mad time. And what was bizarre was like, it's almost like the day before Stephen was murdered, everybody, black, white, were getting on playing football. Literally the day after, there was a massive split in the school. And, you know, white guys who I'd go to their house or they'd come to mine suddenly stop coming to my house, or I wouldn't go to theirs. It was just like, oh, battle lines have been drawn. And so that was a bit odd. And as time went on, that kind of changed. But I reckon for about 6 months, it was pretty full on.
I can only imagine. And it's like, it's sad that I, this year or in recent years, have felt like that time that I see as something that elder cousins or parents experienced in the latter part of the 20th century in this country is now, you know, becoming super relevant again.
Oh yeah, it's frighteningly familiar what we're seeing now. And I'm hoping it doesn't get to the point of where we start seeing again young people of colour being, you know, murdered. I hope it doesn't get to that point. But we've also got to appreciate that some of the rhetoric which is coming out, we've seen before. And the history of this country is very much when there's a recession, there is a blame on migrants or immigrants. And that's something we saw in the 60s or 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and it's happening again. And I think it is scary. Definitely at that point in my life, I didn't understand the socio-economic, political nature of what was going on. I just saw my friends getting targeted or, you know, people not really understanding what's going on. I think as you get older, particularly in this time, you understand that it's not just what happens on the street level, what is fueling this stuff. And I think there is a rhetoric around immigrants being the big problem here. And we've seen recent marches, haven't we, where it's kind of that feeling has all come together and a lot of it's ended up in violence. So I'm personally very nervous about the direction of travel that we're going in.
And I think that's why these conversations are important, and the work you do is vital, which I think we can start talking about.
Yeah.
So obviously I'm skipping a few years because, you know, you're growing up in Southeast London, and then you found a charity in the 2010s. Several years later, you've experienced lots of life things in that time. You've built experience as a youth worker. We had Justin Finlayson on a previous episode of Safe, and it struck me when he was talking about founding his charity, United Borders. And also it has struck me across my own career that a lot of the most powerful solutions to violence affecting children come out of tragedies. So you never wish those tragedies to happen, but I guess like anything, you know, it's like World War II happening and then Britain creates the welfare state, right? Like we create solutions out of things that are happening. As far as I'm aware, Power the Fight, your charity, started in a similar context. So can you just talk me through what happened and kind of, the motivation for founding that?
Yeah, I'll take a few steps back, because I think you made a really good point that most of these organisations, charities, initiatives start out of kind of trauma and tragedy. And it's really important for me to state that that wasn't my upbringing. Yes, I've just explained that there was a situation which happened when I was 14, which I think probably definitely fueled my desire for justice and protection of young people. But I didn't grow up in trauma. I had a very happy, loving family. When I talk to other people who have gone through some horrific things, I'm very fortunate that that wasn't my story. My history of working in youth offending services and community safety teams came out of a passion to see communities be safe and peaceful places, and for where young people and families can flourish. And that was always my desire. A lot of it's come out of my faith as well, that, you know, I honestly believe that communities can be redeemed and reconciled. And by the time I got to making a decision about Power to Fight, I'd always been thinking about, what is missing in how we continue to help communities flourish and stay safe. What happened was that a young man called Ciaran lost his life to violence. He was murdered in New Cross. I'd known Ciaran and his family since he was 1 year old. He lost his life when he was 17. So this was the first time where I think it was the closest person I knew had lost their life. It wasn't the first young person I'd worked with or I'd known, but this was definitely the closest person. Right. And I think that does change a few things, because you throw yourself in a way which you haven't done previously. You're supporting the family as much as you can. You're trying to get justice and all that type of stuff. And then what happened was at his funeral, his best friend gave a eulogy. And I will never get used to 16, 17-year-olds giving eulogies about other 16, 17-year-olds. And that young man, a couple of months after, tried to get some therapeutic support and couldn't get it. Waiting lists are too high, and people didn't think he actually could self-diagnose. And then a few months after Ciaran, he was murdered. So now you've got this collective trauma in Southeast London. And for me, that was the moment where I said, you know what, I think we can do something. We should do something. It's his funeral, which was bizarre. It was his funeral where there was about 400 or 500 teenagers came to his funeral, all in school uniform. And there wasn't any adults around. And there was a lot of trauma. And I think that's where I said, okay, I think we can try and do something which addresses the therapeutic support young people need and the trauma which young people are going through.
When you're talking just then, it reminded me a bit of when we first spoke, which was in conversation shortly after my book Cut Short came out. And I was in a mad space myself because I'd just spent 7-8 years as a youth worker in South London. I'd then written this book and I was trying to make sense of all of it. And you spoke about the importance of youth workers getting clinical supervision, so youth workers getting therapeutic support. And I remember I messaged you after the conversation being like, that really struck me that I just haven't had received enough of that. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to just say thank you, because that was one of several important conversations at the time that led me to then sort of explore that as an option. And I don't think I'll be sat here today having this conversation if it wasn't for that period, those interventions. So I'm now like really passionate advocate for therapy for young people, but also just generally. Why do you think it's so essential for young people who are living in communities where there are various social problems taking place, but obviously violence is is proximate. Why is it so essential, therapy as a solution?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a space which we don't talk about. I think we just expect people to go through traumatic events and then crack on. And when things then happen, like, and that can be multiple things, where kids play out in the ways where criminality comes from, or they have breakdowns, or people turn to substances. And we're always like looking at that as the issue, as opposed to taking a few steps back and asking, how did they get to that point in the first place? And I think we don't want to talk about that. My own experiences when I was working in the youth offending service, this would have been kind of at 06, and we lost a young person to violence, and there was no clinical supervision for professionals. So, we gathered together as a group of professionals, we spoke, we hung out, we prayed together, whatever it was, but there wasn't anything professional. Fast forward, it's not just professionals, young people are crying out for a very specific type of therapy. Now, just going back to, and now you're making me think, actually, this is a great conversation because I'm beginning to connect the dots. So when I got attacked in 1993, they offered me therapy. And I'll never forget this. Like, my mum and dad were like, okay, I don't know who it was. It must have been the police. Said, we got this therapist, psychologist. And I remember going to the session, and it was a white woman. And it was so odd because it felt like she was just asking me to talk about what happened. But she was going into some real detail. So so what happened? And I was like, well, I got attacked, and they smashed my head against a car, and they were really beating me up, and I wasn't sure if I had weapons. Okay, and what were they saying? And I had to repeat like all this racist abuse which was coming out. Anyway, so I came out of it, and my mum was like, "Oh, so how was it?" I was like, "I don't want to go back." And she said, "Fine." And fast forward to what we're doing, I think there is something about not just therapy. We're talking about what I would now call culturally sensitive therapy, where people understand the communities that we're dealing with. And that is why our Therapeutic Intervention for Peace report, which came out in 2020, we spoke to communities why those black and brown communities who were impacted by violence wouldn't get therapeutic support. And part of the reason was because they felt that a lot of the white-led therapy and psychologists would not understand their trauma. So for me, it isn't just about the importance of getting therapy, it's the importance of getting culturally sensitive therapy, which really understands what the communities we are dealing with and engaging with are going through, which is very specific.
If you're enjoying this conversation, hit subscribe or follow to make sure you don't miss out on the next one. And feel free to leave a comment or a review. Cultural sensitivity is like one of the big things that Power the Fight obviously pushes for. It's also what you're writing your PhD on. So you're presumably you've been living and breathing this concept. What does it look like in practice? And I know you applied it to therapy just then.
Yes.
Presumably there are, different public services that can benefit from this type of approach.
Absolutely.
Schools. Like, what does it actually look like?
In a nutshell, cultural sensitivity is very much about understanding your hyperlocal context. So a lot of people talk about cultural competency, but competency means mastery, and you can't really master culture. So if you take Peckham, for example, so you talk to some people, and when you say Peckham, they might think only fools and horses, right? When I think of Peckham, I think of rooftop bars and overpriced coffee, because that is what Peckham has become. Culture shifts, culture changes, right? So for me, being able to be sensitive, having sensitivity to the communities around you, understanding the hyper-local context, taking a posture of learning, as opposed to I'm coming in here with all the answers, is what is at the heart of cultural sensitivity. And that is therefore something which can be applied to social workers, teachers, police officers, NHS staff, anyone who is, and I'll use this word deliberately, anyone who is serving the community.
And how does that look like in a program that Power the Fight might run? I think I've spoken to you and your colleagues about some of the things that involve art and I don't know, there's a variety of different practical things when you go into a school and you train teachers or you deliver things to young people. Talk me through maybe like one of the programs that you think is really important.
So our TIP program, our Therapeutic Intervention for Peace program, is a therapeutic program that goes into schools and works specifically with those young people who may well be at risk of violence. Now, the key for us is that we have psychologists and counsellors and therapists who are culturally sensitive, who understand the communities, maybe from the communities. It's not just about ethnicity.
Yeah.
It's not like, we're not trying to do a tokenistic thing where it's like, you have to be a black person or brown person, or you have to be a white working class person to engage with. We're saying, no, it's more than that. It's like, do you really understand the culture that you're engaging with? So with that now, as you said, we've in the past used art therapists, and it's very much a co-produced piece. Again, that is the cultural sensitivity piece towards it. It isn't just we're coming in there with all the answers. We spend a lot of time having the conversations about what do you want to engage with. And, identity and violence affecting young people may well be two of the topics which regularly come up. But once we've done that, we can either now do one-to-one sessions or group sessions. But everybody engaged understands very clearly the communities that they are working with. And what we've seen from that actually is an 80% increase in young people's well-being. We use psychological measures to evaluate and monitor that. And we feel that we have something where this cultural sensitivity piece at the core, where there's a reduced chance of bias and stereotyping, a lack of empathy, a lack of care, that is reduced because actually the people are culturally sensitive in what they're doing. But there's also another piece, which is about how do we then train people in that as well. So we have a whole training arm, a training team, which will train the teachers in the TIP program. But we've trained, as you said, multiple sectors in this space to become more culturally sensitive in their context.
The latest data that the Youth Endowment Fund has found from surveying 10,000 teenagers across the country found that 25% of teenagers are now turning to AI for therapeutic support. 50% are turning online. And I think that's like, it says a lot of things. I think it also on some level makes sense as well. Like, I think these are useful technologies in some ways. And actually, if you can get the right information to you without having to source complex therapeutic admin systems, I think it makes sense. It's also a bit worrying that a lot of young people are feeling the need to try and get hold of that support themselves in isolation. How do you see how kind of the trends of the last 5-10 years in terms of tech and social media and that kind of thing? How has that impacted the work that we do? And how do you navigate that?
So I think we underestimate the power of technology in the last 10 years. So quick example, when I was a teenager, which was longer than 10 years ago, if I could listen to the Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac in my house in South East London, and I was never going to meet them, right? Unless I was going to go to a concert. And even then I wouldn't meet them. Whereas what's happened now, there's been a shift in how we make music, and now our musicians are very UK based, and they're from the estate which we grew up with or grew up in. And the speed of how you make music has changed because of technology, right? When I used to run a record label and work with young people in Clapham and Brixton, we'd spend a lot of money going to a studio, and I was there as the older to try and help them navigate the type of lyrics they were saying, and then we'll put that out, and then we had to press vinyl and all this type of stuff. None of that's there, which, is another conversation about quality control, but none of that's there. I think that's an example of how technology has shifted. At one point it was, I need help to do music. Now it's do it yourself. I think therapy for some young people was exactly the same thing. At one point, if I want a therapist, I go now it's like, well, I can download an app and that's going to satisfy me. And I think that's quite a scary space to be in. I think that's quite dangerous. I think there should always be, in my opinion, an intergenerational conversation. I think we sometimes miss that. And I think that we are woefully behind the speed of technology. And I think AI obviously is going so fast at the moment. And I think in a couple of years, it's going to get to a point where we are not going to be able to keep up. We might not be able to keep up now, but I can understand why young people, I think there's a lack of trust. I don't think young people always trust adults. And that's a shame, really. And that's why I'm always encouraging youth workers, embed yourself within the community. This is the cultural sensitivity piece as well. Are you embedded in your community? Do the community actually see you outside of your 9 to 5? Are you in a position to where the community can be like, oh, that's my youth worker, that's my mentor, that's somebody who's a community leader or whatever you want to call it. We have to do that, although people will find their own ways of doing that.
Yeah, and it's you spoke about music, and I think that analogy is really, really strong, because I think there's a lot to be celebrated about what's been able to take place over the last 5, 10, 15 years when it comes, for example, to like UK rap and grime and drill, you know, just stuff that's cultural product from this country have been like thriving in a time that actually many other measures haven't been in this country. But obviously it just brings a lot of risk and a lot of danger attached to that because of the speed of it. And I think you're right to draw an analogy to the therapeutic potential of that as well. It's a scary idea that a teenager can go online and potentially get told how they can support their lacking mental health or kind of make sense of experiences they've had.
It's just not, it doesn't feel natural. I mean, one of the things that we always celebrate is the mentor-mentee relationship.
Yeah.
And if I said to you, Ciaran, like, name a few people in your life who you can go back to or who have made that impression on your life, who've guided you, given you advice, I'm sure there'd be lots of people. I think as soon as you remove that, I think you take something away from the flourishing of people. And it's about relationship. I think we don't want to take away that relational piece.
You spoke about mentor-mentee, something we, I think is increasingly becoming like a used term in this sector that we're working in, or multiple sectors. And something that we push for a lot of the Youth Endowment Fund is the idea of a trusted adult, having a trusted adult. And I think part of the reason I like the term is it kind of speaks to what you just said of like that it doesn't necessarily need to be like a teacher or a formal person who is working in an institution that's serving you, but it could also be just someone in your family or whatever. And I think trusted adults for me is at the heart of what solutions to violence can be. What do you think? Yeah, how do you think the role of trusted adults can play, especially, I guess, thinking about the type of work you've spoken about Power the Fight doing?
I think the idea of trusted adults is a good one, but I think my version of my view of a trusted adult could be different to a young person's view of a trusted adult.
Yeah.
So I could turn around and say that older on your ends, I don't trust him or her.
Right.
And they could turn around and say, yeah, but they've always been there for me. They've always put money in my pocket. I've anything I needed. So I think we just have to be careful. Are we setting the perimeters? Are we the ones who are saying that it's this version of a trusted adult we're talking about and not your version of a trusted adult?
Yeah.
And I think that's the complexity I sometimes have, because I think we all know, we could all see that maybe the older on the ends isn't good for them, but that isn't that's not necessarily their perspective or context. I think in general, the idea of a trusted adult is a good thing, but I think we have to do a lot more deeper work to unpack why some people who are deemed to be trusted in other people's views are not. Let's take the police, for example. Maybe a lot of people will look at them as a trusted force.
Yeah.
But from other people, it's like, well, actually, I don't trust them. So maybe it's just how my mind works. Sometimes I see phrases and I'm like, yeah, but to whom?
Yeah. No, it's a great challenge, and not something I'd thought too hard about, actually, given that I suppose it's like it's a really good example of a potentially quite abstract thing in policy that I can say, and then thinking about it in terms of the lived reality of a young person, especially a young person growing up in like where there's lots of dense, complex community relationships taking place. I can see why that is maybe quite limited as an idea. It's useful as a starting point, but not as an endpoint sort of thing.
I think it's useful, and I think it's somewhere where we want to maybe get to, but even the community work we do, so we do a lot similar to you. There's a lot of things we do we can't put on social media. There's a lot of stuff which is going on in communities where we're having to engage with families and young people, and you get to that point of being trusted by taking this culturally sensitive approach, which is one which isn't imperialistic. I'm not ever going to walk into a community and say, I know it all, I've got the answers. But that takes time, right? So I can't do that you mentioned Justin. I can't go to Brent and do what I can do in maybe Lewisham because I've spent 25 years working and living in that area.
Yeah.
So I can go in and hopefully the community trusts me. But I think what happens is that we think this is transferable, and some of it is transferable, but I think we need to be, the other term is culturally humble, cultural humility. Are we humble enough to appreciate that one person's view will be very different, and it's okay for you to fall back and not feel like you've got all the answers. Like, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and often we don't use that ability to listen.
Yeah, agreed. Tell me about your PhD.
Yep, so my PhD is at Durham University. I am looking at culture sensitivity, specifically in teacher training and how that impacts the flourishing of Black Caribbean children. So stats will tell you that Black Caribbean children are the ones who are likely to be most likely to be excluded, the ones who are not likely to get their qualifications at GCSE level. Obviously, we know there's a traveller community as well. But when we look at the stats for Black Caribbean children and the ones who are entering the criminal justice system as well. So one of the things which I always wanted to look at, I try and look at institutions and systems. I think in the past, we've all been guilty of looking at these issues on an interpersonal level. What is that young person doing? Why are you not doing this? Why are you getting excluded? And we don't want to take a kind of wider look, widen the lens, take a little bit more of a bird's eye view. And that's what this PhD is allowing me to do. It's allowing me to look at kind of teacher training and what are teachers being trained? Are they being trained to understand specific communities? Do they really understand the very specific issues that Black Caribbean children and communities are going through? Is there something about how teachers are being trained? We know that they can be trained to be teachers, but are you trained to care enough about the communities you're going into? So, I'm looking at one specific school in Southeast London, but I'm also looking at a specific training provider as well. So I'm trying to understand what a culture for school really looks like. I've interviewed teachers and young people and parents and carers. I've looked at their policies, induction policies for teachers, but I'm also looking at a national training provider and asking the questions, well, how are you training your teachers? What are you training? And I think there's some emerging themes, but one of the biggest things which are coming out at the moment is that the DFE and the framework for teaching doesn't allow for two things. One, it doesn't allow for diversity of thought as a teacher. It's so rigid that if you're a teacher who wants to be creative in a different way, it's very difficult to do that. And there's a lot of pressure on teachers. It's very results focused and behaviour focused. But the second thing is it doesn't allow for diversity of thought for communities. So if you're a diverse community and you have a different approach to how you might learn, that isn't something which those frameworks allow for. And that's the problem.
Recently, new stats have come out that have shown that suspensions and exclusions across the board are higher than they've ever been. What's your take on that spike?
I think we've underestimated COVID, definitely. I think the nobody saw that coming, and
No.
nobody was prepared
No.
for how to teach in COVID, and then the impact that would have on communities and families and young people and their experiences of school. You take anybody out of normality for a period of time, bringing them back in, it's going to be a nightmare. And I don't think there's been enough aftercare or thought of aftercare for those young people who have gone through that. And I don't know if the school system's really recovered from that. I think we don't talk enough about poverty. We have to appreciate when there's extreme poverty in spaces and communities, things which might be a priority to me and you becomes less of a priority for other families and other communities at times. And
Right.
and sometimes schooling isn't that.
Okay.
And that's not a judgment. That's just me saying the reality is that poverty drives a lot of the issues that we are dealing with. I think one of the things we don't often talk about is the pressure teachers are under.
Yeah.
So one of the things with Power to Fight is that when we went back into schools after COVID, we offered reflective practice for teachers, and that just allowed a lot of space for critical thinking. And you forget, I mean, I never looked at my teacher as, oh, you might have your own family. I was like, you're a teacher. Same way, I often didn't look at the police as like, oh, you're human, you got your own families.
Yeah.
I'm just like, no, you're the police, that's your identity. Actually, reality is that a lot of these teachers have their own families, they're going through their own, they went through COVID like we went through COVID.
For sure.
I'm so thankful for the online teaching, which allowed my children not just to be taught by me. You know, it's brilliant. But I think there's a mix of things which is going on where I think actually exclusion rates are going up because there's a lot of pressure on results. And I think some schools are like, well, we'll do exclusions in a way which makes our results look better. It's easier to palm them off to alternative provisions. I think there's a lot of stuff going on which need to be explored and expressed. And unfortunately, the ones who are in poverty are the ones who are being impacted the most.
I think I've seen that you've shared that you, at Power the Fight, support families through times of need. And that's like both, I believe bereavement, but also, other types. I just wondered if you could talk through some of that.
Yeah, so it's a good point, and I think it's important to appreciate that I do believe that families need support. Some families need extra support, not just in times of trauma or bereavement, but, you know, Power to Fight run workshops for families. Some of the workshops that we have run has been, how do you actually communicate with your school? How do you communicate with the teachers? There's certain language and ways that you engage to try and get answers and get the best version of schooling for your children. And I think there's also a blame game going on which we try and fight against as well. So if we talk about the online safety space, and you know, it's a lot of parents struggle to keep up with the multiple social media apps which are out there, and don't know about WhatsApp, don't know about Snapchat, don't know about TikTok, you know, and we've done those types of workshops as well. So we've supported in that space. There is the bereavement piece as well. So we financially support families who have lost young people to violence, and then we try and signpost them to other services. We've had partnerships with South London and Maudsley Mental Health Trust, where we've worked with bereaved families and combined the cultural sensitivity, but also work closely with their psychologists and therapists. And yeah, we've got a report coming out very soon, which will show a 2-year study where that has we've worked with that. So and just to be clear, that space is really underfunded. So most things about our charity, we get funded. The care for families and the bereavement piece and the money which goes to families, that comes from our reserves.
Right.
There is no funding stream out there which is actually helping us to support families, which I personally think is disgusting. When a young person loses their life, we always focus on that moment. We focus on the funeral, and then it's almost like, oh, we move on. The truth is, with Power to Fight, we've been working with some families for 6 years who lost their young person 6 years ago, because we know that that trauma and pain doesn't suddenly end after you've buried that child.
One final thing. When we like spoke before even having this conversation, you like challenged me to make sure that we were keeping enough joy in the conversation. I went away and thought about it, because I was like, that youth work is mostly joyous. That's the thing. But obviously the conversations like this, often you're talking about important, urgent issues. I just wanted to, I wondered if you have a recent example of joy in your work at Power the Fight.
We've got an incredible alumni group of young people between the ages of 13 and 17 who have come through our TIP program. And, you know, during the summer, we were able to continue to engage with them. And it's little things like, you know, we did a sports day with them, and we took them to Thapar and stuff like that. And for me, and we're trying to work out more ways of engaging them outside of the context of, oh, you could be impacted by violence. It's like, no, we also want you just to be joyful young people and enjoy life, and we hopefully can give you the opportunity. So seeing them just being kids and just enjoying life in the safe, is a beautiful thing. We also hanging out with my team as well. So we recently went to Durham and to celebrate the launch of the Contextual Safeguarding Global Centre, and we took the whole team up there. It's like 15 of us, and also just being in that new environment, meeting other people, seeing their minds being blown to the incredible speakers which were there. I was really fortunate. I really was like, this is a really good team. So just to see that learning. So for me, those are the two things which I recently, that was fun. And personally for me, I find joy in my family and with my children. I run a lot, you know. We got half marathons coming up to raise money for the organisation. I like music a lot. I just had a conversation with somebody saying we need to throw a party because we haven't done a party for a while. So let's see what we can do there. But I have to battle for it. It's like I have to fight for it. If I don't, I just get caught up in the awe of life. But I think we have to fight for joy.
Agreed. Let's end on that note. Thank you, Ben Lindsay. A pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
If you'd like to find out more about how to keep young people safe from violence, hit the link in the description.